LBJ and the Great Society by Tej Mystery. Who was LBJ? Lyndon B. Johnson was the 36th President of the United States. He was a former senator and Democratic Majority Leader from Texas. And in Texas, he posed a conservative to win the Senate elections, but by heart, he was actually a liberal. And when he became president, when he took over after JFK's assassination, he kind of became a liberal. He shed his conservative skin, kind of like a snake. And he held similar ideals as JFK, and they were both very democratic. And in LBJ's cabinet, he kept many of Kennedy's team members. And he was supported and inspired by FDR and his New Deal reforms. And you can see the New Deal influence in his Great Society reforms. And you can see in the political cartoon, he has his New Deal, he has his, um, Great Society reforms, and he's asking FDR how they are. And LBJ actually referred to FDR as political daddy, but like that's a questionable term. What was the Great Society? It was a series of reforms planned by JFK but carried out by LBJ, his successor. And initially a $1 billion investment to the war on poverty, he called it. But by the end of the war on poverty, he spent more than $1 billion by the end of the presidency. It was closer to like 3 million. And it was responding to America's poverty, which is very rampant at the time in the 1960s. The Big Four. And the Great Society focused on four main aspects of American society. First being education, then medical care, immigration, and voting rights, specifically for African Americans. Project Head Start. So at the time, there were lots of underprivileged children. They didn't have much access to a good education. Their schools were underfunded, and it was just very bad. So he created Project Head Start, which would provide preschool children of low-income families with a program to meet all their needs and help them learn. And this will help break the cycle of poverty as as you're educating kids, and when they grow up with that education, they can go to college and then eventually get higher paying jobs, and they can finally get themselves out of poverty with more money with the higher skilled jobs. And this helped over 30 million kids. Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is made for the elderly. It was health insurance funded by the federal government. And because medicine isn't cheap, and lots of old people at the time were falling into poverty because their medications were just so expensive and they couldn't afford it. And a lot of them were dying. So he did this to help them and it significantly reduced poverty rates among the elderly. And Medicaid for the poor, and it offered health coverage for people who qualify as low income. And this allowed infant mortality rates to fall as people can now afford to go to the hospital and deliver there instead of at home, where it can be very risky for the mother and the baby. And even though, an important note, like all of these programs help millions of Americans, it would significantly strain the federal budget and exacerbate economic problems in the future, like the OPEC oil crisis in the 70s. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. This abolished the national origins quota system established in 1921. So basically, back in 1921, the quota acts were established, and this blocked people from this block is limited immigrants that coming into the country and discriminated based on origin. So they were more it was more likely for a European from France to come in than someone from Argentina because of their national origin. And these acts remain in response to the Red Scare, which is they didn't want radical ideas and Catholicism and all these immigrants coming in, and that would threaten democracy. But this was eventually abolished in 1965. And but overall, this doubled the number of immigrants allowed to come in annually, and also added a family unification clause, which admitted close relatives of U.S. citizens, allowing many more people to come to U.S. And you can see in this chart, um, from the before the 1960s and 70s, most immigrants coming to the U.S. were European. It was a huge majority, and after the 1960s and 70s, you get a lot of people from Asia and much less from Europe as a whole, some from Africa, and a lot of people from the Americas still coming in. So it shows the diversity that is growing in America. Voting Rights Act of 1965. This outlawed literacy tests and sent officials to some southern states to register all votes, including African American votes. This is very important because a lot of people often ignored their votes and just didn't register them, but now people were enforcing the registration. And this act was fought for by Black leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who practiced pacifism and nonviolence. And this showed, and Martin Luther King Jr. was criticized by many young leaders because they wanted a more violent and militant approach to fighting discrimination in American society. And they would be led by Malcolm X, but they had many problems in the coming future. And 24th Amendment got rid of the poll tax in federal elections. If you remember from the Reconstruction era, the North was trying to enforce the 15th Amendment, which would give Black people the right to vote, couldn't discriminate based on race. But after the end of Reconstruction, the South took over again and established literacy tests and poll taxes and grandfather clauses to quiet their voices, stop them from voting, and this eventually outlawed that. And the Freedom Summer of 1964, there was a massive turnout of Black citizens coming. In political cartoon, you can see a Black family wanting to vote, but they can't because of literacy tests. And a lot of these people were very uneducated, so they failed these literacy tests and they couldn't vote then. And you see in the background, it says a land of the free, which is shows how ironic it was that it was they called the land of the free, but these people couldn't even have the right to vote. Battling discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed by LBJ, and this was desegregation on a mass scale. So restaurants, cafes, shops, and schools, especially schools, were desegregated. So now schools, instead of being whites only and blacks only, there were schools where they were together now, they're integrated. And this shows the federal government's power and supremacy over the states. They have the right to impose these new laws despite what the states want, especially in the South, where many states oppose these laws. Has empowered the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission established by JFK, which furthered government power. And affirmative action was also established by LBJ, which is still an affirmative action was that employers must hire a certain number of minorities by law, so it's like a quota. And it's still controversial today with colleges because they accept people based on race and background over merit in some cases, and it can be interpreted as good or bad by depending on who you ask. And you can see in the picture, a white man says, "How does it feel to get preferential treatment just because of the color of your skin?" referring to affirmative action. And a black woman says, "You tell me," showing the ironies of how white people did have privilege back then, but the white man is calling a black person privilege when they really weren't. Criticism and opposition of the Great Society. So obviously there were some problems with the Great Society. Not everybody liked it. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was an integrated party, meaning that had blacks and whites in it and all different races, was denied seats at the Democratic National Convention, Mississippi. Not that many black people in Mississippi registered to vote because they were either scared or just were not motivated enough to vote. And the laws were ineffective at some points. And Republicans called it a waste of billions of dollars. And MLK was assassinated in 1968, which was a common theme because there was a lot of murders at the time because people were protesting these black voters and white civil rights activists who were trying to change the status quo in the South. And many Southerners, like in the KKK, did not want that. And you can see in the picture, it says, "I have a dream and I have a nightmare." Um, it's like a nightmare to the Southerners and the KKK that black people have rights because now they have less control over the South and blacks are gaining more control. Vietnam War, the fall of LBJ. By 1968, LBJ had already sent over 500,000 troops and spent $30 billion in Southeast Asia. And and you might be wondering, like, why would the US want to get involved in some random war in Asia? But It was to stop the spread of communism during the Cold War because the USSR, the Soviet Union, backed up North Vietnam and we backed up South Vietnam, and it was basically like our mini fight because you want to fight the USSR head on, and it was to stop their influence from spreading so that the US would gain domination worldwide and stop the spread of communism. And but this was not taken well by the international community. France left NATO in 1966 and protested American intervention in Vietnam by ordering them to remove their troops, but this did not happen for many years. And in the country, there are a lot of protests. Many people who were draft registrants, so over the age of 18, the men moved to Canada to escape the draft. They burned their draft cards publicly to protest it. There are many street riots. And this was young people. Young people were scared for their lives, developed a lot of anxiety in their lives because basically going to Vietnam was like a death sentence. And this led to a development of a distinct American culture that was very youth based at the time. And it's like the culture of the 1960s and 70s that we all know now. In this picture, you'd see, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And that was a very famous, very often said kind of rhyme, I guess, in protests against LBJ because a lot of people were killed in Vietnam, and these were basically kids because they were just 18 years old, so of college age. And furthering the fall of LBJ with the Vietnam War, um, Lyndon B. Johnson illegally ordered the CIA to spy on anti-war advocates in America, and it's bad because the CIA is only allowed to spy in foreign countries, and it's a very like secret police, totalitarian like things that go on in not democracies, and people saw this as very bad. And then LBJ also did some other corrupt things, like persuading the FBI to develop COINTELPRO, which was a secret name for a program that basically the CIA falsely accused um, anti-war protesters and activists of having communist ties. So kind of like denouncing their role in the U.S. and it's just very wrong because it was unjust. They did not commit these crimes and the government was framing them. And eventually, as the Vietnam War went on, the costs and casualties climbed exponentially. There were over like 100,000 dead, total deaths by 1968, like Americans, everyone in Southeast Asia, lots of people dying. And then because of all these protests, eventually Johnson gave in to like these protests and then said that American troop levels would be frozen so that no more troops would be going in, only a certain level going in, and lessening the bombings in March 1968. And because the you can see the picture, his approval ratings go down, his disapproval ratings go up. He gave up the presidency um, in March 1968 to unite the nation, hopefully. So he didn't run in the next election. LBJ's a great impact on the modern day. In 1970, over 1,400 Black people took office in the United States. By November 2011, there were over 10,000. And I mean, Barack Obama, like the first Black president, there's a lot of Black representation. A lot of them are gaining power and influence in the American government. Um, Medicare and Medicaid still exist today, with over 100 million people enrolled in the two programs. And again, these programs would, even though they help millions of people, they do lessen the federal budget and contribute to less, like more taxpayers' dollars, which makes some people angry. And also, LBJ's reforms diversified American population. So because of the Immigration Act, a lot of people came in, and I mean, just look at our school. Like, there's so many Asians and Latinos, and like so many people of different races, all in one place because of these acts that allowed people to come in. And in the future, that so many people came in that diversified schools and everywhere. And but a negative side effect was that over $120 billion were spent in the Vietnam War, which led to lots of inflation in the coming years and stunted economic growth. So even though poverty levels fell, um, there were some counter effects to it that lessened the good. So it was negatives to the positives. But overall, he lessened poverty. You can see in the chart, poverty levels before 1960 were very high, almost upwards of like 20%, and then they fell after in by the 1970s, but then kind of waves for the next decades. Okay, Jeopardy with Dora. So we're gonna do Jeopardy. Hola, soy Dora. I'm an immigrant from Argentina who came under the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, and I'm here to help y'all play Jeopardy. I'll give you guys 10 seconds to answer while me and Booch kind of like stare at you, kind of like in Dora the Explorer, the show, and because it's interactive. And I also choose all the categories for you. Okay, we're gonna do LBJ's life, $100. LBJ's life, $100. What state was Lyndon B. Johnson from? He was from Texas. Give yourself a point. Education, $200. What was the name of the LBJ program that provided education for underprivileged youth? If you said Project Head Start, give yourself a point. Medical, 300. What are the negative side effects of enacting Medicaid and Medicare? If you said the government has a lot less money because they have to fund these social services, give yourself a point. Immigration, $400. What act of 1921 was abolished through one of LBJ's immigration reforms? If you said the Quota Acts of 1921, you are correct. Rights, $500. What was the name of the act that extended voting privileges to blacks by removing literacy tests? If you said the Voting Rights Act of 1965, good job. So thanks for watching. If you got over $500, good job. If not, at least you tried. Yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.